Šimtmečio mokslo pasiekimas. Tai buvo įvardyjamas gravitacinių bangų atradimas. Pirmasis jas numatė Albertas Einšteinas, bet mokslininkams prireikė 100 metų, kol buvo sukurti įrankiai, galintys jas aptikti. Už tai skirta Nobelio fizikos premija. Tačiau kas yra tos gravitacinės bangos ir kodėl jų atradimas mums toks svarbus? Apie gravitacinės bangas papasakoti paprastai pakviečiau Nobelio apdovanotos laboratorijos LIGO direktorių, žmogų, kuriam ir buvo patikėta visam pasauliui pranešti šią naujieną, profesoriumi Davidu Raice.
What went through my head? Two things. One, this is amazing. This is what we've worked for all these years. But also, seeing a signal and showing that it's a real gravitational wave takes a lot of work. So we actually had to spend a lot of time from the time that we actually saw the signal to convince ourselves that we had really truly detected the first gravitational wave signals from colliding black holes. So yeah, it was both amazement and the realization that there was lots of work to do to convince ourselves and to convince the world that we'd actually seen these events. But it was very exciting, no doubt about it.
Until you were completely sure that you detected gravitational waves, you had to keep your detection, your discovery as a secret. Was it hard to do that? I mean, because there were probably many people working with the projects and not to let, the secret out.
It was very hard. In fact, we didn't do it very well. Within about a week of when we saw the signal, that was on September 14th, 2015, within about a week, there was an astrophysicist, I think at the University or Arizona State University, who had actually tweeted out that LIGO has detected a gravitational wave signal, or there are rumors that LIGO has detected a gravitational wave signal. We ignored them, actually. We just said we're going to try and do our work and not worry too much about what other people are saying. Over the course of the time between the detection of the signal and when we announced to the world, that was about 5 months. And as we got closer and closer to the announcement, it became harder and harder to keep that secret. And actually, right before the announcement, there were stories that were being published in newspapers, one in Italy, one in the Science magazine in the United States, saying that LIGO is going to make an announcement of a detection. So, but we purposely ignored those because we didn't want to respond to them. We just wanted to do our work and let the results speak for themselves. But it was a very interesting time, watching all those things happen on the outside while trying to keep our own progress and our own work going on. So.
Yeah, actually, me as a science journalist, I had a suspicion that you would be announcing the detection of gravitational waves before the event. So regarding the announcement, you were the one who announced the world that you said, guys, we did it. You were standing in front of, media journalists from all over the globe. How did you feel? I mean, weren't you afraid to forget something important?
So we practiced a lot. We knew that this announcement was going to be very big. Although actually, in hindsight, I didn't realize really how big it would be. The reaction, the world's reaction. Most major newspapers had front page stories about LIGO detection, LIGO Virgo gravitational wave detections. I was a little bit surprised by that, but we knew that it was going to be big enough. So we actually did a lot of practicing. So that announcement that you saw, we had practiced that many times before actually going in front of the press and doing it. Having said that, you asked, was I nervous? Oh, I was incredibly nervous. I think all of us were. We practiced, actually. We had a practice the day before, and it didn't go very well. I forgot most of my lines. A lot of people, some of the other people on the stage, like Ray Weiss and Kip Thorne, went way too long. We were told you have to keep your remarks to a certain amount of time, and so after that practice the day before, we were thinking to ourselves, oh, maybe this isn't going to go so well. But I think once we got there, got into the press club where we made the announcement, I think it all went well. But once I started making the announcement, I actually got very comfortable, and it became actually pretty easy. But the moments leading up to it were, they were kind of exciting and nerve-wracking for sure.
Yeah, the video of you announcing your discovery still gives me shivers, actually. So regarding what?
I'll tell you something about that. That was not what I was supposed to say. I actually was supposed to say something different. And the night before, because we had all these problems with the practice, somebody came up to me and said, maybe you should just say something different. What do you really want to say? And I said, well, I just want to say we detected gravitational waves. We did it. And the person who I talked to said, that's perfect. That's exactly how you should say it. So that's what ended up coming out when I made the announcement.
But that was perfect. I can say that it was really perfect. So now regarding the gravitational waves, it's a difficult concept to grasp of for people who are not familiar with it and who have no scientific background. Can you explain what gravitational waves are? I remember when I was in Pasadena, you told me a little story how you practiced with your late mother.
So gravitational waves are a difficult concept. Actually, waves themselves are a difficult concept. So let's try this. Let's start with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein developed a theory of gravity. It's called the general theory of relativity. And it postulates a couple of very important things. And as a physicist, it's hard to get your head around these things because it doesn't really make sense with what you see. In other words, your intuition doesn't tell you that this is the way the world works. But what Einstein said was that objects are attracted to one another because of the way they interact with space. So when I place a big massive object like an Earth or a sun or a black hole in space, all right, the space changes. So space is not nothing. Space is actually basically a geometrical construct that can warp when you actually put mass in it. And the more the mass that you put into it in a compact region, in a small region, the more the warpage comes, the more the space-time bends. In fact, the black hole is the ultimate manifestation of that. It's an infinite warpage of space-time at the center of the black hole. So where do the waves come from? Well, as these massive objects move, and we know that objects move, we know that, for example, the sun goes around the Earth, the moon goes around the sun, that because these objects are moving in space, the space itself is changing. In other words, the warpage is changing. And what's happening is much like when you throw so the analogy one can give is think about the surface of a lake on a very calm day where the surface is very smooth. So this is sort of a two-dimensional analogy. Of course, we live in three dimensions in space. And that there's also time, actually. That's the other feature of general relativity, is that it's not just the three dimensions of space, it's also time. But to simplify things, let's just say we have this two-dimensional surface of a lake. And when I throw a rock in to the lake, the rock hits the surface of the water. And what happens is the ripples that come because the rock actually hit the lake, slowed down, and then starts sinking to the bottom of the lake. But the surface of the lake ripples. So you see these sort of ripples going out like this. Effectively, that's what a gravitational wave is. It's ripples in space-time that are produced by accelerating massive objects. So in the case of LIGO and Virgo, the two gravitational wave detectors that are in operation, you need really massive objects such as big black holes, much more massive than the sun. So the black holes that we detect can be 10, 20, 30, sometimes even 50 times the mass of the sun. And
Why does it have to be this way? Why do the objects have to be so massive for us to detect them?
Because of the nature of space-time itself. The effect, the production of gravitational waves is governed in some sense by the way that interacts with objects. And it turns out the term that physicists use is coupling. How do masses couple to space-time, and what's the magnitude? How effectively do they couple? And the answer is very weakly. So you can think of space as something that's a medium, as I said. Waves can travel through it, and you can think of masses as basically perturbing, warping the space. But the problem is that it takes a lot of mass to actually even create a little bit of warpage in space. So another way of saying that is that the waves that we detect, all right, when we measure LIGO, even though there are these massive objects that are 30 times the mass of the sun colliding with other objects that are 30 times the mass of the sun, these big black holes that we see, the size of the effect is very, very tiny because the coupling is very, very weak. So the signals that we measure in LIGO we measure displacements. Gravitational waves are strains, which is a little bit different than displacements, but let's talk about displacement. It's basically a difference in the distance. So as a gravitational wave passes you, what it does is in one dimension, if it's coming right at you, so suppose I have a gravitational wave coming right into the camera. All right, what it does is it stretches space in one direction and at the same time compresses space in the other direction. So you're stretching like this, you're compressing like this, and then as another cycle of the wave comes through, it actually changes. So it'll stretch in this direction and compress in this direction. But the size of that is very, very tiny. So the size of the displacements, the waves that we measure, are tiny, tiny fractions of the diameter of a proton. So if you can think to your audience can think to itself, how big is an atom? An atom is a very, very tiny thing. How big is the nucleus of an atom? It's very, very tiny. It's 10 to the minus 15 meters. All right, so that's a 0 point and then 14 zeros and then a 1. All right, we detect things that are even 1,000 times smaller than that. So the reason for that just simply has to do with the way space and matter interact. And so that's why it's very, very challenging and very, very difficult. And that's why it took 100 years for us to actually make these measurements.
Can I make a gravitational wave, for example, just by waving my hand?
You do. You can make a gravitational wave, but we can't detect it because the size of the wave that you're creating, anytime you move, anytime you make an acceleration. So my hands right now are generating tiny little gravitational waves, but they're much, much tinier, billions and trillions of times smaller than the gravitational waves that are made by these black holes. So there's no hope of detecting them with the technology that we have today. So you really need to have astrophysical sized objects like big, massive neutron stars or black holes to produce signals, to produce gravitational waves that one can actually measure.
Mm-hmm. When did the events that created gravitational waves detected by LIGO happened, and how do you know that?
So we have detected now more than 50 gravitational waves, and it turns out the gravitational wave signal itself, the characteristic of the wave, gives you information about where they are and about when they were created. So if you think about two black holes, let's place them a billion light years away. The nature of the wave, the way the wave is recorded on our signal, it's basically something called a chirp. So a little bit of orbital dynamics for your audience. So what we see when we measure gravitational waves, so my fists are two black holes, and they're orbiting around each other like this, all right? And as they orbit around one another, they're radiating gravitational waves. So gravitational waves are going out. And what happens is, as those gravitational waves leave, they take away energy from the system. So the orbit decays. And as the orbit decays, the system starts getting faster and faster and faster, and eventually they collide. All right, and the nature of that wave, the fact that the system is speeding up, the orbit is decaying faster and faster, tells you about the masses of the objects. The frequencies give you direct information about the masses of the objects. And then the amplitude of the wave, once you know the masses, tells you how far away the objects are. So some of the gravitational waves that we've seen are pretty close. One of them, the binary neutron star that we measured, was about 100 million light years away, a little bit more than that. Some of the gravitational waves we see are billions. We've seen gravitational waves that are as far as 6 and 7 billion light years away. And what does this mean? It means that there are gravitational wave sources all over the universe, and that's what we're doing. We're actually probing these gravitational wave sources. The other thing I should point out is that we are not very good at making these distance measurements. In other words, when I say something was 1 billion light years away, it could have been 1.2 billion light years away. It could have been 800 million light years away. The uncertainty in the measurements is somewhat high relative to other kinds of astronomy. But nevertheless, we do get this kind of information, and we're starting to build what we call a catalog of gravitational wave events, where they come from different regions of space, they come from different distances, and this is telling us basically how the gravitational wave universe is constructed.
Mm-hmm. These numbers are really mind-blowing. 1 billion light years away, it's really difficult to understand. Gravitational waves is said to be like a new tool to look at the universe. So what do gravitational waves, what do they say about our universe, and what answers can they provide?
So the first thing to know about gravitational waves is that they're a completely different kind of information carrier than, say, light. So if you think about, what do we know about the universe? All right, you ask yourself, how do we study the universe? Well, over the past, hundreds of years, we've studied it using, telescopes. First, you have Galileo with optical telescopes, then people started building infrared telescopes, and now we have, wonderful X-ray satellites and gamma-ray satellites. And these are all different kinds of telescopes that measure light at different frequencies. Gravitational waves are produced fundamentally in a different way than light is produced. Light comes from basically charges accelerating and moving around, and gravitational waves come from masses moving around. So we're looking at a completely different sector of the universe. So the first thing to say is that we're looking at the dark sector of the universe. So we can see things that telescopes cannot see. Two black holes colliding, those are events that probably don't produce light. So we can study black holes. And in fact, we can study exactly how many black holes are out there, what their mass distribution is. Why are there some black holes that are 10 solar masses? Why are there some black holes that are 50 solar masses? Ideally, we would want to look even to higher mass systems, and there are other kinds of gravitational wave observatories that are in construction. So that's one thing we can learn. Another thing that we can learn that is very, very important is where do heavy elements come from? So without going into too much detail, there are objects in the universe that are called neutron stars, and they're produced after massive stars explode and leave behind a solid core of essentially neutrons. All right, they're very dense objects. A teaspoon of a neutron star weighs 1 billion tons. These are incredibly dense objects. Think of them as giant atomic nuclei. Well, when they collide, neutron stars can also collide with one another. And when they collide, they create an environment where you produce heavy elements like gold, platinum, uranium. And so we believe, based on some of our observations, not just with gravitational waves, but also with light-based telescopes, that a lot of the gold in the universe, a lot of the platinum, a lot of the uranium in the universe was produced during the collisions of these neutron stars. So you can start to get insights into what we would call nucleosynthesis. Where do heavy elements come from? Gravitational waves were produced actually at the beginning of the universe. We believe that there is a background of gravitational waves called from the Big Bang, called the stochastic gravitational wave background, that tells us about what the nature of the universe was. These are very low frequency waves, and they're very difficult for us to actually study.
But is it possible to detect gravitational waves from the Big Bang and prove the theory that it's, that Big Bang actually happened?
That there are experiments that are being developed and undertaken right now, looking at the cosmic microwave background and inferring from the cosmic microwave background how gravitational waves were imprinted on the early universe. So the answer is yes, it is possible to do that. Those experiments are very, very challenging, but hopefully within the next, I won't make a prediction, the next 5 years, 10 years, we don't know, we'll be able to actually see those kinds of gravitational waves.
Now going to your personality, why do we explore space? Why is it important for us humans to look deep into the cosmos?
Oh, I think there are a number of reasons. Some of them are just intellectual curiosity. I think humans, certainly myself, are very curious about what's out there. And I think some of it's spiritual too. I think we look to things that are bigger than ourselves. And, when a child looks up at the sky and sees stars in the sky and, talks to his father or her mother and says, what are those? Why are they there? And the father or mother explain, well, those are, basically suns that are very, very far away. I think when kids hear that, they immediately think, wow, the universe is much bigger than me. And I think that leads to some sort of understanding that we're part of something that's much, much bigger. So I think there's a spiritual aspect to it too. The reason I got involved in this endeavor was twofold. One, because I was inherently curious. I studied general relativity when I was in college and in graduate school, and I thought it was a beautiful mathematical theory, and this was a chance to actually do something experimental with it. But I think also because it's you learn. The first time you learn something new, you ask about what was it like just seeing the first gravitational wave signal. There's a sort of a deep sense of accomplishment that comes from you see something that no one else had ever seen before. You've discovered something new about the universe that no one knew, and you can talk about that. So I think these are very important things. There are lots of other things that come from doing this kind of science. A lot of people worry about, well, what are the economic impacts or the technological benefits or spin-offs or things like that. And you get those kinds of things. Fundamental research produces lots of good for society. But I think what most of us who are in this business, the reason we're in this business is because we're curious about the nature of the universe, and we want to learn things that we didn't know before.